welcome to week 2 of Advocates. Today's class, we're going to be talking about faith. Now that may seem kind of like a very elementary thing. Faith, well, we all know what faith is. We really need to have a class on this, but we're going to speak specifically about the forensics of faith. What is biblical faith? What are some misconceptions we have about faith? Is faith blind? Is there such a thing as taking a leap of faith? We're going to kind of dissect all of these things today. Also, I have some notebooks, so if anybody needs a notebook, just let me know. I'm happy to let you have one. So, I don't know how many of you were here last week. I'm not seeing any new faces today. How many of you were here last week? Okay, good. So, you'll remember that I did a role play, and I pretended to be an atheist. And we had a fairly interesting conversation. There were times when it got probably a little aggressive, and but we were kind of pushing each other's buttons. But I still think, how many of you thought that was actually good for you to hear? That was actually interesting to engage that way, right? I think so too, and that's why I did that. Was it's easy to talk about the need for defending your faith, but it's not as effective as when you actually demonstrate why you need to defend your faith. So that was kind of the whole point of doing that. Now, one thing you'll notice, that one thing I did last week was, as an atheist, I positioned faith versus reason. Okay? And I claimed that I was a person of reason. Reason means it is diametrically opposite to faith. And so I put myself on this really high pedestal and said, I'm a person of reason, and you all are people of faith, like down here a little bit. But this is not a correct dichotomy, okay? It is not completely two separate things. And this is precisely the point that Sean was talking about, is that true biblical faith has reason undergirded within it, okay? And so atheists or secular naturalists will operate on this false notion that everything we know comes about because of evidence. You remember me last week, I kept harping about this over and over again as an atheist. I was like, give me evidence. Show me why you believe that. I need evidence for everything. And that's why they kind of have this idea that they're very rational people, because everything is about evidence. But that's not necessarily true. That view is actually called evidentialism. And the view is that the justification for a belief rests solely on the evidence available for it. That's probably not... How many of you are actually able to see that back there? Is that clear? You sure? Sort of? Okay. Sorry about that. Next week, maybe I'll go with bigger fonts. I wasn't sure what size TV we were going to get in here, so I just went with that. In any case, evidentialism is the view that the justification for a belief rests solely on the evidence available for it. You'll remember I was having this back and forth with Jacob. And I was saying, Jacob, if there's no evidence, if I don't see anything tangible, if it's not accessible to my 5 senses, it must not exist. That view is called evidentialism. It is a false view. And I think this is the foundation of that false view is this idea that if you have to believe something, you have to be absolutely certain before you can believe it. What is the problem with that? The problem with that is you cannot be absolutely certain about most things in life. Most people, almost everybody on this earth, including atheists and secular naturalists, operate on a day-to-day basis with some small degree of faith. Now, in that sense, it's not faith in the biblical sense, but faith that things are probably going to work out the way they usually work out. You know, I mean it in the most basic sense. So this whole idea, absolute certainty, is a myth. There's no such thing. And I wanted to show you this interesting slide, but before I show you that, what I want to tell you is, you know, I said that atheists also believe, atheists also operate every day with a certain level of faith. For example, When an atheist gets up in the morning, he believes that his home is still going to be in one piece and everything's fine, that it didn't get robbed or destroyed or something. He's going to brush his teeth, he's going to get ready for work, and he has faith that his work still exists, that it didn't get bombed or something like that. He has faith that his car is going to start up like it usually does, and he's going to be able to drive to work. See, the atheists even plan their entire day, their entire calendar, based on a certain level of faith. Okay? So this concept that you have to have absolute certainty before you do anything is just not realistic. It's just not practical. So let me show you this slide. I thought it was pretty funny. This is kind of, in a sense, this is what the definition of atheism, right? In a sense, the belief that there was nothing, and then nothing happened to nothing, and then nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything, and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason whatsoever into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Just in case you didn't get that, that requires a lot of faith. You see what I'm saying? That's actually what they believe. And so if you're going to hold to that view, that everything is just like, the reason you have reality around you is because billions of years ago, somewhere lightning hit some mud puddle, and a tadpole slowly developed into one of us, and we're sitting here today, that requires a lot of faith. What happened to all the evidence that they keep asking for, And we're going to get into these kinds of issues. We're going to get into the beginning of the universe, cosmology, DNA. We're going to get into all that stuff in the coming weeks. So just hang tight if you have any questions about that, or we can even talk about it later. But the point of the matter is, even atheists live by faith. So it's a false dichotomy that faith is opposed to reason. That is not necessarily the case. Now, having dealt with that, that's kind of a summary of last week. But moving forward, let's look at some common misconceptions of faith. Okay, this first idea is that faith is blind. I said this last week as an atheist. I was like, well, if you guys believe this, you're just kind of believing it. Do you have any evidence for it? You're just kind of holding to this view because you just want to hold on for it. Essentially, what I was saying was that your faith is blind. I've even heard Christians say this. I've heard Christians say, well, faith is blind. That's how it is. Another misconception is believing in spite of or even against the evidence. Sometimes I hear this view that there are different levels or degrees of faith. And the more faith you have, it's almost like it doesn't matter what the evidence is, I still believe. You see what I'm saying? That there's kind of this tendency to elevate faith to some sort of abstract thing in the cloud that you can't even put your finger on. And we're going to talk about why that's not real faith. Another misconception is blind faith is actually better than rational faith. I've actually heard Christians say this. I've had conversations with people who have been Christians for several years who have said, yeah, Prashant, you're talking about all this rationality and faith and all these things, but see, I just believe. And I think that kind of faith is far more superior. I've actually been told that. And we're gonna look today and see why that's not true. In fact, Sean actually says that in the video, right? He gives specific examples of places where people put their faith in Jesus because of things they already knew. They had heard about him, they had seen him do certain things. It wasn't blind faith. Their faith was grounded in reason. So biblical faith, what is biblical faith? Faith is putting our trust in Christ because of what we know. Not in spite of what we know. Faith is putting our trust in Christ because of what we know. So you see, immediately there's a foundation for reason over there, right? Any one of you who has walked with Christ long enough, who has seen God do amazing things in your lives, you know that's why you go and pray to him. That's why you commit your life to him. That's why you consecrate yourselves before Him every day, is because He has come through for you in the past. You have seen God move. That is your reason for why you put your faith in Him. So it is not true that your faith is blind. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul appeals to eyewitnesses. That's one example. And Thomas wanted evidence before he could believe. Honestly, I think sometimes Thomas gets a bad rap. We've labeled him Doubting Thomas. All the guy wanted was, look, what? Jesus is raised from the dead? I don't know about that. I need to see it with my own eyes. Are we seriously sitting in this room and saying we would not have done that if we were him? Of course we would have. Right? That's reason, right? Reason prevails and says, no, dead people don't usually come back to life. It's not the norm. And yes, this man was my master. Yes, I loved him. I adored him. I followed his ministry everywhere. And now you're saying I saw him die. And now you're saying he's alive. I can't buy that. I need to see him. And what do? Doubting Thomas. 2,000 years we have called him that. But actually, I think that's very reasonable, isn't it? Thomas wanted evidence for the risen Jesus. And guess what Jesus did? He gave him the evidence. Jesus said, Thomas, look at this, the piercing in my side. Jesus understood this. He showed them his hands and his side. Now I want to point out something else here. This is why the disciples died. They died believing, right? Because they saw Jesus do these things. They saw Jesus teach with divine authority. How many times in the Bible when Jesus teaching and people are like, who is this man? We don't know anyone who teaches like this. This is amazing. Jesus performed miracles. People were like, what? How did he do it? He raised someone from the dead. Jesus died. They saw Jesus die and rise again just like he said he would. They could not believe. I was having a conversation several years ago about martyrdom. What does it mean to be a martyr? And one of the skeptical arguments that kept coming up was, well, people got deceived and they just went to their death. Now, I can tell you this, it is possible that someone might go to their death because they thought something to be true, because what they believed in, they believed it to be true. Nobody will go to their death for what they know to be a lie. Does that make sense? Nobody will go to their death for what they know to be a lie. The disciples believed Jesus. They saw him do these things. They saw him go to the cross. They saw the risen Jesus, and they were never the same. They were never the same. It changed them forever, and it changed history irreversibly. That's why they went to their death. Faith is grounded in something that is far, far deeper than just merely some sort of blind assumption. I want to just share a quick story with you. When we first, we actually moved to the U.S. in the fall of '09. We lived in Missouri for about 2.5 years. And I decided that I wanted to get some higher education. And so I got accepted into this university in California. And my program was going to start, I'm trying to remember now, the 28th of January, I think. So in December, I started applying for jobs, and we started looking for homes, because we decided we were going to move to California. Time kept going by, and we couldn't find a job, we couldn't find a home. I don't know if I've mentioned this story before, but my wife and I started getting anxious. We were like, my classes are going to start in a few weeks, we need to be there. And we're still here, we don't have a home, we don't have a job, what do we do? And we spent some time fasting and praying, and during our sabbatical time, both Elisha and I got a strong impression, like the Lord was saying, go. Go. Now, if you know Elisha and I, we are not spontaneous people. We are not, let's do it, got no plans, let's just do something. We're not like that. We're very, let's get all our ducks in a row, let's plan everything out. Just to go to a two-day trip to somebody's house, we have an Excel sheet that's color-coded with all the things that need to be packed. And anyways, I feel bad for my kids. That's how we are. So, for people like us, for God to tell us, don't worry about a job, don't worry about a home, go, was just like, are you kidding me? No, we're not going to do that. And it was just everything within us was like, we can't do that. That just doesn't make sense. It's not wisdom. But you know what? We could never shake that feeling out of our hearts. We could never do that. Both of us came, we got together, we talked about it, and she was like, I feel like God's saying go. And I was like, what? God's saying the same thing to me. And we just started laughing. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. That's not him. I think it's indigestion or something. I don't know. But like I said, the feeling just never went away. And we actually started, and we started seeing biblical evidence, like even Abraham, right? Abraham actually didn't know where he was going. He just went. And even at the time that God asked him to slay Isaac, actually Hebrews says that Abraham reasoned that God could raise Isaac from the dead. Hebrews 11 says that. So Abraham was reasoning in his head that God could do that. So why would I not obey? And we looked at all of this and we were like, we got to have more faith. If this is what God is telling us to do, we're going to obey. Oh my goodness, the flack that we got from our friends and from extended family, they were like, are you crazy? What are you both thinking? You have a 5-month-old and you're going to go all the way to California without a job and a home. Oh, here was the grand plan. Our plan was to actually pack up all our belongings in an RV and drive from Missouri to California. That was the great plan. And the plan was actually to live in an RV park until I got a job. Right? I know it's got brilliance written all over it, right? But this was what we were thinking of doing. And there were so many friends who were like, "You guys are crazy. Don't do this. This is mysticism. You're just over spiritualizing things." No. December 1st, we are still in Missouri. But the RV is there. We've reluctantly packed everything. And even on the morning that we pulled out of her mom's house and got on 35, headed toward California, I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing? What are we doing? This doesn't make sense at all. Anyways, 3 days across 6 states, 1,700 miles, no job, no home. And we're driving. That morning, we drove through the Mojave Desert, we pulled in California, we went into this RV park. I parked the RV, I connected to the Wi-Fi. The first email was from Biola University saying, we have a 1-bedroom apartment, are you interested? Like, I'm choking up just telling you the story now. I remember just falling on my knees and just sobbing. And just like, Lord, how could I doubt you? You know? If that's not a God moment, I don't know what is. I was sobbing in that RV. You can ask Alicia about this. And it was beyond reason. I couldn't even reason that. But God honored our obedience. Right? It says about Abraham, Abraham's obedience was credited to him as righteousness. And so faith is something much deeper. Faith is not about making decisions based on your circumstances. It's not about whether we got all our ducks in a row. Often God is calling us to something much deeper than that. He's saying, don't make your decisions based on the things around you. Who am I? What is my character? What is my nature? That's where you ground your faith. You know, and I think of it like this. Oftentimes, this is kind of how we think of faith, right? And I'll explain this analogy to you. There's a difference between believing that God will do something, and believing in God. So imagine you decide to go mountain climbing, right? You go into this store and you decide to buy this rope, and the man says, yeah, this is, high density, high gauge, whatever, capacity is like 10,000 pounds, whatever. And you're like, yeah, that's awesome, I'm going to buy it. And you buy it and everything, and then you go mountain climbing, something goes wrong, you slip. Now you're hanging from the edge of a cliff by that rope. It was one thing before, while you were standing in the store, to cerebrally think, yeah, that rope can hold 10,000 pounds. I know it. But now you have to actually put your faith in that rope. Now you're hanging by that rope. Now what you think about that rope is completely different, isn't it? The way you understand the strength and the tensile strength and all those things of the rope is completely different than the cerebral way that you knew before when you were in the store. Does that make sense? You guys see the distinction? It's one thing to believe that God can do something. It's one thing to believe that God will do this or God will do that. It's an entirely different thing when you're out of cards to play. You can't do anything anymore. All you have is God. And then you put your faith in Him. Now that's faith in God, not faith that God will do something. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Faith is not cheap. It'll cost you something. It always does. And I call this the 3 C's of faith. Okay, the 3 C's of faith are control, comfort, and convenience. And I want you to think about that. How many of us say we give lip service to having faith in God, but we're always pulling the strings to make sure that everything plays out the way we want it to? That's control, right? We say we're going to put our faith in God, but we make sure that our comfort level is not disturbed too much. We say we want to put our faith in God, but then if things look like, if there's a path, if there's 2 choices and one of those paths are less convenient, we pick the more convenient choice. But putting your faith in God means that you will sometimes have to relinquish your control, your comfort, and your convenience. Does that make sense? True biblical faith, if it is grounded in the nature and the goodness of God, if it is not grounded in evidences, if it is not grounded in your circumstances, if it is not grounded in the things that you think you need to make this work, then it has to be grounded in something that is going to cost you something. It'll cost you control, it'll cost you your comfort, and it'll cost you your convenience. A lot of times, I've had conversations where some people have been like, Prashant, I feel like God is calling me to do this. And, I'm not saying this to be judgmental. You never know, because you can't read a person's heart. You don't know if I can't say, no, God didn't say that to you. Obviously, we can't say that. But sometimes there are certain clues. And if the decision that they're going to make seems to be absolutely comfortable for them, it's not going to shake up their comfort too much, it's going to be actually pretty convenient in all these ways. But when they talk about it, like, yeah, this is not what we wanted, but we feel like God's calling us to this. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure. I believe you, but typically, biblically, when you look at the biblical narratives of the great titans of the faith in Hebrews 11, every time God has called them to do something radical, it has cost them all of these. It seems, maybe it's a push to say this, but it's almost like a formula. It's almost like it's a rite of passage. If you want to go deeper and deeper in your faith with God, you have to go through rites of passage where God slowly chips away at your control. He slowly chips away at your comfort. He slowly chips away at your convenience. And when you've reached a point where these three C's do not exist anymore, or at their most minimal, now God is ready to use you. Does that make sense? I wonder, Pew Research recently, I think all of us in this room know this, but Pew Research had a statistic that came out a couple of years ago that talked about the decline of evangelical faith in the West. I wonder why. I wonder if it has anything to do with this. You know what I'm talking about? These have become idols in the West. I know brothers and sisters, obviously I'm from India, but I was born and raised in the Middle East. I know brothers and sisters in different parts of the world where they hug each other and they kiss each other before they go to church because they don't know if they're coming back together as a family. And, we walk into church, there's beautiful music, there's coffee, there's donuts, we have comfortable chairs, nice room, and all of this is good. It's not bad. But somewhere, affluency and comfort and convenience have somehow eroded the foundations of our faith. Does that make sense? I think it's not a stretch to say that maybe Western Christianity is on the decline because these are idols we are not willing to give up. All right, what are some false teachings on faith? Most of you, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with what is called prosperity theology. Faith is slaughtered in that theology. Okay, here are some actual quotes. These are not written by, I typed them obviously, but these are quotes by very famous people who are part of the prosperity theology world who believe these things. They believe that faith is a force that activates God. I don't even know what that means. How do you activate God? Words are the containers of that force. With this faith force, people can create their own realities. You see what's happening here? This is kind of like a sort of like a mystical sci-fi kind of thing. Notice that there is no sovereignty of God in any of these statements. Everything is about you. Everything is about the power of your words. Everything is about what God should do if you do this. This is a false teaching. Faith doesn't work like that. This idea, I've heard some of these preachers say things like, look, God spoke the world into existence, which means what? Which means his words have power. And if we are the children of God, therefore, by principle, we have the same power, so we can speak our reality into existence. Did you just see what happened? They just equated themselves with God. This is blasphemy. This is heresy. They believe in, it's called the power of confessions. If you're familiar with prosperity theology, this is a very common term. Positive confessions, negative confessions. So if you want good things to happen to you, you confess things positively and good things will happen to you. If you confess negative things will happen to you. One of these preachers, his name is Fred Price. I actually don't have a problem naming these guys because they're false teachers. Paul actually says you should name them and call them out, so I'm not ashamed to do that. Fred Price is a prosperity teacher, and he actually says this, right? He actually stood up and gave this sermon once, and he was sniffling through that sermon, and he said, the devil tried to get me with sickness, but I decided not to accept that. So I rebuked it. I wasn't going to make a negative confession that, I'm sick. And so I refused to give that sort of negative confession because I will not succumb to the attacks of the devil through sickness. Dude, you're already sick. Your nose is running. You already have the cold. Too late. What are you talking about? See, this is mysticism. This is not Christianity. Faith is not some magic mantra or ritual that we can manipulate to get things for ourselves. You know, sadly, I've actually, and I think, I do think maybe this is sort of the allure or the appeal of prosperity theology, is this idea that faith is almost like a covenantal contract you have with God. And if you are a child of God and if you exercise that kind of faith in Him, God has to give you what you ask. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are familiar with prosperity theology in here? So you know what I'm talking about. This is the wrong perspective of faith. Faith is not some magic mantra or ritual that we can manipulate to get things for ourselves. It is also not the way that Scripture orients faith. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is, I think, a very creedal, a very foundational statement on biblical faith. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. See, hope implies a certain degree of, it doesn't, if anything, it does not imply absolute certainty, right? It does not imply that. That's why you hope for it. When you say, I'm hoping for good weather, you're not saying you hope for good weather because you know you're going to have good weather. It's because you don't know. But it's also the assurance about what we do not see. See, faith is, that's the beautiful balance of faith, is you're putting your hope in God, but through that hope you have an assurance. Now, does that mean that it is always going to come true for you? Probably not. But this is why your faith must not be grounded in the tangible. This is why your faith must not be grounded in your circumstances. It must be grounded in something far superior and far deeper than that, and that is the nature and the character of God. You know, humans are finite creatures. Our knowledge is acquired primarily through experience. This was one of the things I was talking about last week. I was saying, look, reality has to appeal to one of my five senses. And if it doesn't, then I don't believe it. It's not true. You know, and while I demonstrated why that's a false argument, I do think God understands that we are finite creatures and we are very easily moved by the finite. This is why Jesus did not rebuke Thomas when he asked him for evidence. This is why when Thomas said, I don't believe, I won't believe until I see, Jesus appeared and he said, okay, see, you want evidence, right? I'll give you evidence. And I think there is the grace of God there. He does know that we are creatures who live in time and space. We are creatures who our only primary interaction with reality is through our five senses. He would know, he created them, right? But this also explains why the things that matter most to us are actually not tangible things. Think about it. The things that we care about the most, love, peace, joy, relationship, these are not tangible things. These are intangible things. These are the deeper things. These are invisible things. There's nobody, maybe there has been somebody in history who's done this, but nobody in their deathbed is saying, I need to know what my bank balance is. When you are in those stages, you want to be surrounded by the ones you love. And I think C.S. Lewis actually is really good. In one of his books, I forget if it's Mere Christianity or if it's The Weight of Glory. He talks about how it's really difficult for human beings to understand the word glory. We just don't get it. But the closest he could come to understanding the word glory, he could understand because of nature. Imagine standing before the Niagara Falls. It's breathtaking, isn't it? Those of you who have gone to the Grand Canyon, it's breathtaking. Why? Because it is so vast and you feel this small. That's why it's breathtaking. The reason it takes away your breath, the reason you are in awe of that is because there's something transcendent about it. When you see that magnificent Niagara Falls in front of you, you're like, I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say. This is the reason why some of the ancient cathedrals, I lived in Scotland for about a year. Some of the most beautiful castles. Amazing. You walk into some of these cathedrals, you walk in and the roof is like 200 feet high. Not 200 feet, maybe about 70, 80 feet high. But it feels like 200 feet. It's really tall. It's really high. And you know what? The architects of those cathedrals did that on purpose. They intentionally made the insides of the cathedrals that big because you would feel this small. So that when you walk in, you see, oh my goodness, this is the house of the Lord. And I'm nothing. I'm like this puny little thing. So anyway, you get what I'm saying. The point of transcendence, this is the point that C.S. Lewis was making. When we think about our lives, and we think about some of the deepest and most valuable things that we can ever think of, they're all things that are actually sort of hard to describe. There are things that is hard to put a finger on because they almost escape your mind's complete comprehension. And what Lewis says is that this world was only meant to arouse in you something that you're not yet meant to have. Okay? Listen to him. He says this directly himself. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Does that make sense? If you find in yourself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that you were made for another world. The point being that this world is not meant to satisfy you. This world is not meant to complete all of your desires. If you put all of your grounding and all of your worth and all of your hopes and your expectations in this world, you're going to come out with nothing. Interesting fact, when you look at Luke chapter 16, it's a story of the rich man and Lazarus. Now, scholars will actually tell you that there's actually very good reasons to think that that was not a parable. That Jesus was actually hinting at an actual incident. But one of the things that I always found curious about Luke chapter 16 was, we have some characters who are named, and then you have a rich man who doesn't have a name. What's going on over there? If this is an actual incident, if this is true, why aren't all the characters named? Now in the Latin Vulgate, he does have a name. In the Latin Vulgate, his name is Dives. But every other translation, you read, you go to Luke 16 right now, you're going to see it says rich man. One of the commentators had this very interesting thing to say. He said, rich people in those days, well, I guess rich people even today are like that. When you put all of your worth and all of your everything into your wealth to the point where what you have now becomes synonymous with your identity. Okay? Now listen to what this guy is saying. He's saying, if your identity is wrapped up in your wealth, and if your wealth is something tangible, and if tangible things do not cross over after you die, but if your identity is wrapped up in it, what happens to your identity when you die? It's gone. What a brilliant move by the authors of the New Testament to not name the rich man. Do you see what's happening over there? This man was so wealthy, he was so rich, all of his identity is wrapped up in his wealth, that when he actually crossed over, he doesn't even have a name. And this is the point. The point of the matter is, this world is only meant to be like a training ground. It's meant to be like a place where you are being refined, where God is chiseling away at your rough edges, preparing you for the glory that awaits you, preparing you to be like His Son. This is what sanctification means. Justification, we're getting into some doctrine here, but justification means It is an instantaneous legal change of status for you where you have now become a child of God. You have been wiped clean. You have been redeemed. You've been reconciled. You're united with God. That has already happened. Sanctification is a process. Is a slow process that is only going to end once you breathe your last. And sanctification is designed to make you more like Jesus. And as long as that process keeps going, the right orientation of our hearts should be heaven-bound, not earth-bound. We should not look for earth to satisfy all of our deepest needs. We should not look for the ultimate value and purpose and happiness and joy and all these intangible things that we deeply desire. We're not going to find it here. And that's precisely what Lewis is saying. That's why most of the Christian life involves this. Biblical faith in the Christian life involves God transitioning our faith from the natural to the supernatural. Another way to say that is from the tangible to the intangible, from the visible to the invisible. True biblical faith is grounded in reasonable evidence that we know the character of God and we have seen him come through for us in so many different ways. The reason the disciples believed Jesus, the reason they were able to put their faith in Jesus, the reason why even when they were killed for their faith, they knew what they were doing because of what they knew already, because of everything they had seen him do. It wasn't blind, it wasn't a leap of faith, it was a reasonable faith. This is why it is not true that Christian faith is blind faith. It is not blind faith. The Apostle Paul says, if Christ was not raised from the dead, we of all people should be pitied the most. That is the reason by which, if reason were a thread, that is the thread by which Christianity hangs. It is because the tomb is empty. I saw this New York Times article. It said, God is dead. We should be dancing on his grave. Dance all you want. That grave's empty, dude. There's nobody in that grave. That's why Christianity is true. If Jesus' bones can still be found today, if you go back and if they somehow found Jesus' bones and did a forensic test and discovered that it was him, Christianity's over. But they didn't. They didn't. And we're going to get into those classes. We're actually going to do a very fascinating class on the resurrection. And I'm going to walk you through all the common arguments that skeptics give about the empty tomb, that his body was stolen, that it was actually buried in the wrong place, and that the Roman soldiers actually took it, or the disciples themselves came and stole it. We're going to go through each and every one of those skeptical arguments and whack it out of the park. So, Christian biblical faith is grounded in reason. And it is not true, it is absolutely not true, that our faith is this sort of abstract thing that's floating around in the ether. I've always wondered why God didn't reveal himself more tangibly. I'm sure some of you have thought this in the past. You've been like, it seems kind of difficult to be a Christian. I have to put my faith, I have to exercise my faith so much. Things would be a lot easier if God would just appear, just dazzle me. How many of you have thought this? Let's be honest here. At some time, at least once in your life, you've been like, God, just... And I've actually heard even skeptics make this argument. They're like, well, if your God is true, if he's all these things that he's cracked up to be, why does he take such great pains to hide himself? Why wouldn't he just reveal himself? I guarantee you, if God showed up and did a miracle and a sign and wonder in front of me, I would believe. Here's why that's not true. Because history shows us it's not true. The Exodus story. They saw God every day. They saw God plagues. They saw they saw a pillar of fire. They saw water coming out of a rock. They saw manna fall from the sky every day. They saw the Red Sea split. Oh my goodness, I love that miracle. There's one of those Old Testament miracles. If I could pick just one that I want to see today in flesh, that's what I would pick. Is the splitting of the sea. They saw those things every day, and they rebelled. They whined. They complained. They were idolatrous. So what does that mean? Logically, that means signs and wonders does not mean that it will produce faith. Why? Because of the sinfulness of the human heart. People who were with Jesus during his time saw him do miracles. The Pharisees saw Jesus do miracles every day. They did not believe. It did not change their heart. Judas was in ministry with Jesus the whole time, and it did not change his heart. I think God knows, because of the depravity of the human heart, because of the sinfulness of the human heart, if he dazzled you, if he showed up right here today and dazzled you with some amazing thing, our sinful hearts are so bad that we'll figure out a way to rationalize that away. If a skeptic, if God showed up that way for a skeptic, at least I imagine that's what a skeptic would say. He'd be like, well, I don't know, it must have been something I ate. Yeah, too much wine for lunch. My mind is hallucinating. I don't know, maybe I need to go get checked. I'm seeing things. Clearly that's not true. Right? If you're pre-committed to an idea that you don't want to believe, it doesn't matter what you put in front of you, you are not going to change your mind. The story goes of this man who suddenly, for some reason, thought that he was dead. He went up to his friend and he was like, hey dude, I think I'm dead. He's like, what are you talking about? You're standing here talking to me right now. He's like, no, I know to you it looks like I'm alive, but I'm actually dead. And after a little bit of this nonsense, his friend was like, okay, look, dead men don't bleed. Show me your finger. And he showed him his finger, he took a needle and he pricked it and it started bleeding. And his friend was like, oh my goodness, dead men do bleed. And what's the point of that story? The point of the story is if you're so pre-committed to an idea, even if you have tangible evidence in front of you, you are not going to believe. This kind of obvious divine revelation that we sometimes expect won't necessarily change the human heart. God knows this, because God knows that we are finite creatures, and giving us the finite is not going to satisfy us because of our human heart. This is why we need the infinite. We need the intangible. We need the invisible that is grounded in Him. This is why Jesus said, blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. You see that? Because that kind of faith requires a deeper. That kind of faith doesn't just come by itself. It develops over time after a faithful walk with God. You know, our family has actually lost count of the number of times we've seen God come through for us in the most dire circumstances. But I can tell you this, because of those circumstances, our faith is now conditioned to a point where, for the most part, it is not affected by what happens in the natural world. We're not perfect. We still have moments where we're like, God, we don't understand what's going on. But we've seen enough. We've seen God do so much in our lives, both for Elisha and I, that we are no longer moved by our external circumstances. When everything looks bleak, we're like, okay, so what? God is still on the throne. He is still sovereign. He's still watching over me. He knows what is happening in my life. That is enough. That is the point, ladies and gentlemen, that God wants you to come to. God does not want you to be at a place where you put your faith in this world, that you put your faith in the circumstances, that you hang on to those 3 C's, your control and comfort and convenience, because what that means is you you are choosing to put your roots in this world instead of in the next world. You're choosing to put your roots down in the things that you can access with your five senses instead of putting your roots down in the intangible, invisible, omnipotent, omniscient God. And that is the process of sanctification. As God continues to change you and transform you and make you more like His Son, all those areas, all those places where you've put down roots in this world, He will slowly uproot. And sometimes that uprooting is painful, but it's good for you because He's preparing you for the next world. See what I'm saying? And because we have evidence, because we have seen evidence of His power and goodness in our lives, we can now put our faith in Him even when we cannot understand what He's doing. I'm reminded of Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What did they do? You know, they worshipped the true and living God, and the king was about to throw them in the furnace. And he said, you know, stoke it up, make it 7 times hotter. And what did they say? They said, our God will save us, but even if He doesn't. See, that's the crucial point. It's not this, look, as Christians, we're not immune from trouble. We're not immune from suffering. This is why prosperity theology is false, because it teaches you that if you are a child of God, you are guaranteed immunity. You're guaranteed safety. You're guaranteed protection. You're guaranteed health. You're guaranteed wealth. These people have never studied church history. When you look at church history, how many of you have heard of this book called The Fox's Book of Martyrs? Anybody? If you read that book, it is a chronicle, it is a record of waves and waves of persecution of Christians. These are not made-up stories. These are true, like eyewitness testimonies. How can you read those things and think and believe that you're guaranteed that? This is why God says, this is why Jesus said, right? He didn't say, in this world there might be trouble. He said, in this world there will be trouble. There will be trouble. And when those times come, where is our faith going to be grounded? Our faith should not be grounded in our bank balance. It should not be grounded in our jobs. It should not be grounded in our spouse. It should not be grounded in our children. It should not be grounded in anything material that we can hold on to. And the sooner we give up those 3 C's, the closer and the faster you are moving toward becoming like Jesus. I know that's hard to hear, but that is the heart of what God is doing for your sake, because He's preparing you for His kingdom. Amen? That is true, biblical, rational